Hey, Gateway Youth and Friends, it is Adam for our Walk Through the Word Wednesday. We're picking up again in James chapter 2, starting in verse 11. Last week we looked at 8, 9, and 10, and James has this wonderful passage talking about how, as a Christian, we shouldn't have partiality. We shouldn't treat people differently because of who they are, what they look like, money, things of that nature. And he makes this really strong point saying that if you do so, you might be good in a lot of other areas, but this is a sin. It makes you a sinner. And he goes a little deeper here this week in our passage in chapter 2. So let me pick up and we're going to unpack this together. It says, verse 11, "For he who said, 'Do not commit adultery,' also said, 'Do not murder.' If you do not commit adultery but do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty. For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment." So he starts off with this really powerful statement. He says, "Do not commit adultery and do not murder." He says, you might be great at not committing adultery, but if you're a murderer, it doesn't matter. Like, he's making this case for us that you can't ignore the sins in your life by pointing at the things you don't do. And he kind of encompasses a lot of our sins that could fall into a couple categories with these broad statements. Like adultery, you can look at it as being kind of a private, internal sin, a sin of the heart. That's kind of, not a lot of people are even going to know that you're committing adultery in the heart or adultery secretly behind closed doors. But it's a sin. But you might say, I don't do that. But if, as Jesus says, you have hate in your heart, you're a murderer. If you have active, outward, public sins, but it makes you also a sinner. You can't say, my sins no one knows about, and I'm okay, if you have sins other people do know about. Or you can't then say, my public sins, they're out there, you know about them, but I don't do this other bad thing, this private sin that you don't know about. His point is, he's making to you and I is, it doesn't matter what's happening, whether people know about it or whether people don't know about, or whether people don't know about it. A private sin like sexual sin or a public sin like murder, it doesn't matter. You can't justify yourself by saying, I don't do that thing that person does. I don't like what they do. I'm okay with what I'm doing, but what they do isn't good. I'm okay. And he makes the case here. He says, you're a lawbreaker. You can't be justified in the eyes of God by pretending that the sin that you commit isn't that big of a deal. And then he goes on, so speak and act as those who are judged under the law of liberty. This is a confusing thing for some people. They think, like, does this mean I have freedom to do whatever I want, the law of liberty? The context here for James is he's not saying that there is no law. He's saying you need to live as a Christian with a desire to follow the law of God because of the freedom he's given you in salvation, that you're not doing it out of obligation because you want to. He says you want to live as someone who's living for God by choice, and that's an important consideration in this context. And so that is a vital thing. And then finally he says, "For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment." And so the heart of the law of liberty that he talks about in verse 12 is that God has given us mercy. And that if you are experiencing mercy from God, are you giving mercy to others? Because if you don't give mercy to others, you're living as someone who has not actually received mercy. Because the judgment we want to give to people is a judgment that we're grateful that we're not receiving from God because of our sin. And so again, this is a great passage to challenge us to be honest with where we are with our sins and not pretend we're doing something that we're not doing, but also to acknowledge that we've been given great mercy, and that great mercy should motivate us to living a life that's changed. And if we're living a life that's changed because of the great mercy that God has given us, then we must be extending that mercy to others. And if we're not extending that mercy to others, it might be a sign that we haven't truly experienced and accepted the mercy that Christ extends to his people freely for all those who will believe. I hope you guys that helps as you go through James chapter 2. Hope you're having a great week. Can't wait to see you guys in person again soon. God bless.